anyway, I will wind it up there because yeah, um, and really kind of hand it over to the questions. See if anyone would like to draw anything out of that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think for me, this is a little bit like the prodigal son and the older brother, and
Yeah,
particularly the how Jesus, talks to the talks about the older brother, and or the father rather talks. You've had all these things, and so on, and I think it is a real lesson to us about comparison, isn't it? That it's just don't go there.
no, no,
It's
no. Yeah, and the thing that I think I perhaps wasn't getting very across very well is when you have a number of opportunities early on, even if they're unfairly, you get opportunities. You learn to make the most of those things, which means that then you'll probably do better even when somebody who's not had those opportunities gets given the same. You'll probably still do better because it's just that cyclic thing. But
Mm.
it kind of shows in many ways. It's, I think the reason Jesus does it several different ways is because there is a challenge in grace, because in grace you don't get what you deserved, but none of us get what we deserved. But
Absolutely.
we're so we get so drawn into thinking, but I
Mm.
deserve it more.
But it's our sort of tit for tat world, and Jesus is constantly addressing that, isn't he? And trying to point out grace. And what I find quite helpful for me um, is is just to really focus on how God has used stuff in my life
Yeah,
to deal with me, to work on areas which have needed his work. And that he will be doing the same with other people.
yeah,
So though they might seem to have a great opportunity at this point, he will still be working on them. Do you know what I mean? So
no, no, yeah,
it's when we try to be God, isn't it? We want to play God and say, well, I don't think you should have done it like that.
yeah,
And it's really saying, I think for me, stepping back into it's just me and you, God. And
yeah.
I trust that that relationship is the same for other people, and that yeah,
No,
you deal
no,
with
no.
them in
And
the same way.
I think there's something of that challenge of to hear that um, many are called, but few really have fewer choice. Few really have because you think just uh, maybe you've never thought like this yourself, Barbara, but I think you kind of think. Wow, I've been a Christian a long time. I know my Bible pretty well. I know how to pray for people. I know how to publicly speak. I know how to do those things. But actually, as soon as you start thinking like that, you realize you're kind of putting yourself in that place that will get outraged by when the Lord does the most remarkable things with someone who, in your mind, doesn't deserve it. So I find it useful to remind myself of that in a kind of a strange way, when I recognize the worst motives in me, at least I know that that doesn't actually affect my calling. He's still called me. It's just I'm not living up. I'm not really expressing it that well. um,
Yes.
you know.
I find it quite helpful just to see the opportunities as coming from God's hand. If I start to sort of think, oh, why did that person choose that person? That's when I can get into
Yeah.
problems. But if I can see it as God meeting out, do you know what I'm saying? That
Yeah.
that he's so for some reason he felt that they needed to have that opportunity and I didn't. And so he's preparing me for something else.
No, no, no. And just as an interesting throw in is you brought it out by making the statement, Barbara. Just looking back. Oh yeah, that's right. Verse 15 is you're evil because I'm good. That little phrase that Jesus uses regularly, which we know from the ancient world. The evil eye is about jealousy, and I think it's such an incredibly relevant because we live in a world which across the political spectrum seems to be driven in destructive ways by envy in different ways. Envy of those that have, and envy of those who get given who don't deserve. But so envy on both sides often creates the conflict that prevents us from being able to build layer by layer towards something better for everybody. And so I think, I think it's interesting to notice that how often Jesus addresses it. So we have to remember, and although it's not quite the same, but I was using that little verse the other day, which I think is again so real. It's it's little foxes that ruin the vineyard. That all the things that you think will be fruitful are often they come to nothing because of little petty jealousies. So it's that those kind of envious, emotional, internal things that make us resentful. They feel they create distance between the generosity of God and us. Jesus does address quite often in different ways.
And possibly, possibly we have these situations to show us what's in our hearts, so
I
that
know, I 100% agree. I think so. Yeah, definitely, Barbara. Yeah, I
we
think
can work on it.
I know. I know. I have definitely had that conversation. Why did that happen? Well, now I can see something that that is not so pleasant. Yeah,
That's the reason.
that's the reason. The reason it happened is because of me. Yeah. No. Yeah. Any other thoughts, or anyone else like to comment or contribute something?
Yes, Chris. I just got reminded of the time that the disciples had to address what was considered as unfairness in distribution of substances, food,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
And they had to deal with that. And I'm kind of now thinking, because some of these things really do happen, there is a time when in a church or in any other area of life, you find that there is truly some kind of unfairness
Yeah.
in service or in distribution or even in gift or rewarding. Let's call it rewarding. How do we address that? Because obviously we have to be careful in the sense that everybody has to get an opportunity, but at the same time, there is or there could be a true unfairness.
Yeah, no, I think it's because I do think, Joseph, I think it's a very real issue. I think part of the problem is the word fair is quite a fuzzy word, which is why I've noticed now people talk about, because I think they're trying to give definition to it, equality of outcome and equality of opportunity, but the two often are in conflict, you see. And that's the thing I'm often saying is there's a general rule. If everybody right from year one had always had the same opportunities, then actually you could say, well, so and so did twice the amount of work and therefore they've been paid twice as amount. So nobody then, that's okay. But the reality is it's such a mixed up world that actually, as I said, I tried to drive all the way through. My ability to take an opportunity may have been affected by other things that have happened to me. And so then I can focus on the fact that I haven't got the same outcome that you have. You get paid more than I do, you see. So I think what's really important here is to notice that Jesus is talking about daily wages. So we're not talking about super rewards. We're just talking about the fundamentals of the ability you need to live a good life. I've got the food and enough food for my family and so on, and I've got my day's wage. So there's a kind of a general thing where I think on the whole we try to help people to be more focused on gratitude for what they have than resentful of what they think others have got that they deserve. So that's the bias. But, and this is why I'm saying it's not necessarily all black and all white. It's often that here's the majority, but it's held in tension by this other thing. There are times where things are really inequitable. Like, you have systems whereby if you're part of the ruling family, you get everything coming to you, and actually those will be disrupted by the growth of the kingdom, but they tend not to be disrupted by people who are motivated by the envy, if I can see it that way. So if I feel I'm sitting there thinking it's so unfair, those people get everything, we don't get anything, I'm going to use my envy to drive me to smash the things to pieces, and I succeed, but then I suddenly become now the ruling party who gets all of the benefits. So we just replace one for another. So the I think the emphasis is we try to help people to be grateful for what they've got, and at the same time we kind of create the challenge, and the challenge of the if you like the common, God's common love for all of his children is a really, really important principle. I saw a little comment the other week from Tom Holland, who's an atheist, but he wrote the book on how Christianity has made the world a better place. The Dominion book, and in that he was having a discussion with a Christian. And he said one of the things people don't realize is it's not that the Bible sometimes says things like slavery is wrong, and they get criticized because it doesn't say slavery is wrong. But there are things within the Bible that when you talk about them, debate them, make them part of what you are. He said, in my research, an argument against slavery has emerged independently about 6 times, but always in a Christian context. So it's never appeared in an Islamic context. It's never appeared in a Hindu context. It's never appeared in one of these. So he said, and that's because the ideas are often are really, really deep. And he talks about them being like depth charges. And it's only as they ripple up that you start to see the change. And so to come back to your question, I think when you have those really unjust systems, when you try and confront them directly, one to one, you tend to just replace one bad system with another bad system. But there are these things buried in the Christian literature, the Christian thinking, by the revelation of God, that in Christ there is neither male nor female, slave nor free, Parthian nor Scythian. You see, that breaks down all of those divisional things that we might base why somebody should get more than another person, as we can start to work on that. And so he made that point that at least 6 times in his research, you can find an argument against the institution of slavery has emerged, but nowhere in the Bible is there a nice simple verse that says you shouldn't have slaves. And he said, but actually that would be a problem, because in the world that often was dependent on slavery for an income for someone, it would mean you'd say, well, you can't have any slaves, which has happened, of course, in history. We get rid of slavery, so now we chuck them all out on the street. Now they don't have any income, and people die of starvation. It's a much more subtle way in which the gospel kind of grows up to produce. And sorry, this coming back to the way you started, Joseph. I always remember an American friend used to say, he had this Texan accent, so I could do a Texan accent. Say, God ain't fair. He is just, but he ain't fair. And I think what he was driving at there is that often fair is such a fuzzy word that you can always find something that you say is not fair in the world. It's not fair that, you can see what a privileged life I had when I was trying to think of an example then of something that wasn't fair. I'm thinking sometimes that, it's not fair that on several occasions in my working life, someone's given us a car. I know people who I'm sure deserved that blessing far more than I did, but that's great. But there is something just in the way that God does stuff. So I think the fairness question is not irrelevant because it's so wound into us emotionally. But from a pastoral point of view, I always try and get people to be grateful for what they've got, but then to try and behave with as much responsibility, i.e., let me encourage you to get out early in the morning if getting out early in the morning means you get a job, whereas getting up late doesn't. So you need to be encouraged to do that. So we try and encourage the positive and try and draw attention away from the inequalities of outcomes and opportunity. But that doesn't mean to say that those things aren't important. It's just the way we get to them is much more cooperative, layer by layer, working together and suddenly discovering, as Joseph will know, because I use the phrase a lot, because it's really struck me in the last year or so, where Paul says that your goodness would be of your own volition. It wouldn't be under compulsion. That you wouldn't do the right thing because you're forced to, and that seems to be right at the heart of what the Lord wants to produce in us from a discipleship point of view. Is not that so he's right when he's writing to Philemon. He says about Onesimus. He said that I want your goodness to be not under compulsion. That actually it's something that grows in us as we recognize, okay, it's, you know what, I've done better out of this than so and so did, but I've got something now, so maybe I can share it, and then we start to see that we see the benefits growing. But
yeah, I guess it's how we behave when no one's watching, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rather than doing it because we'll be looked at nicely by other people. It sort of shows what's in our heart.
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah, this is really challenging. I looked at that and thought, well, that's really unfair, but that's probably my privilege.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the last phrase you said? That you said you looked at something and said?
I looked at looking through that passage.
Yeah.
Beforehand, you're thinking, oh, that's really unfair that the last one got the same as the first one.
Yeah, no. Well, that's what I'm saying is that fairness thing affects us all in different ways. So, and I think all of those parables that Jesus talks about when he uses money in the mix, I think that he knew that in the audience and amongst his disciples as well, there'll be people saying that's not fair, but sometimes for different reasons.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're trying to be grateful and positive when you see others doing well or better than you, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Yeah. Good.
Just wondering, Kristen, how do you see this fitting with God is not mocked, you reap what you sow? And do you know what I'm saying?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
That
is why I think that's why I said it's not it's one of these. I don't yet. I increasingly see that often Scripture presents things in tension, not in contradiction, but in tension. Yeah. And what we often want to do is release one thing from the tension it has on the other side. So I
think that's still the right principle, isn't it? That we have to work ourselves.
So that's why I'm saying very often I would look at it and I would
thing,
because my feeling would be that sort of the 9 out of 10 times the thing is, you try and be responsible, do with it, you sow, you reap. But there are times when that doesn't work. And actually, therefore, we have to hold something of tension that actually helps us navigate emotionally through that. And when those things aren't quite as simple as that. And to remind ourselves that actually sometimes people can't take the opportunity, even though they were given it fairly. So I think a classic sort of in this would be the sort of the politics of Black Lives Matter, where I think both of the extreme sides on those things are in total mess. They're in a total failure of because there are at one level. Here you go. I'll get into trouble when I say this. At one level, when people talk about reparations, I think, well, who owes it to who? And there's economics are done that's saying, well, some of those who were taken by slave traders, their ancestors now are doing far better than the people who sold them as slaves from Africa in the first place. So who pays reparations to who, I don't really know. But then the flip side, to say that actually therefore nothing has actually hampered some people because of the prejudice of the societies that they come into, that misses the point. Because while we may have put the law in place that says now that we can all ride on the same bus and you have access to the same things, but sometimes people can't make the most of those opportunities because of some of what's gone on. So you've got this constant sort of tension between things, and we like logical things, so we like to cut the link that holds the thing in tension, if that makes sense. So and in my simplistic approach, I think the way we try to get through is we try to focus people on the way God's blessed them and how they can bless others. And in the context of that, we can start layer by layer to try and unravel the bits of life that have developed around them that hold them back unfairly, or in which they hold other people back unfairly. We try and release those things piece by piece. But there you go. Now we've taken pretty much the whole hour. As I said, it will be a short one. I won't shut it down totally now. One of the things I'm thinking of doing, by the way, is because people look at the thing when it says a whole hour, they think I'm never going to listen to that, so they don't listen. So I may put the Q&As into a separate file rather than so we just have here's the teaching and do the questions later. But anyone else like to comment on anything? Ask anything? No. No. All right. Well then, let's leave it there then. Let's leave it there. But I'll go back. So we've got the thanks for watching. It's always nice to have that slide at the end when we finish. So good. I will see you all in a week's time then. And thanks for turning up.
Really good. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bless you, Joseph.